The glass doors of Sterling International opened just after 9 in the morning, and the entire executive floor seemed to move at the same speed as its ambitious young CEO, Victoria Sterling. At 32, Victoria had built a reputation for being intelligent, disciplined, and nearly impossible to impress. She was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the city, and that morning she was preparing for the most important meeting of the month. Her company was negotiating a massive partnership with its chairman, a legendary businessman, whose approval could determine the future of the entire company. Everyone expected the meeting to begin at 10, but there was one problem. The chairman's private office had suddenly stopped responding to calls. Victoria had already tried 3 times, and she was becoming increasingly frustrated. She turned toward her assistant and demanded to know whether anyone had heard from him. The assistant shook her head and explained that the chairman had left his office early that morning but had not answered his phone since. Victoria immediately decided to call him from another number. She looked around and noticed a young man standing near the reception desk. His name was Daniel Carter, a 31-year-old single father who worked as a maintenance supervisor in the building. Daniel was dressed simply in a clean gray shirt and dark trousers, carrying a toolbox in one hand and his phone in the other. He had spent years working hard to provide for his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, after becoming her sole parent. Daniel rarely complained about his circumstances. He simply worked, came home, and made sure Lily had everything she needed. Victoria approached him and politely asked whether she could borrow his phone for an important call because her own device had suddenly frozen. Daniel hesitated for a second but handed it to her. Victoria quickly opened the contact list and dialed the chairman's number. She expected the call to connect normally, but the moment the screen lit up, something unexpected appeared. Instead of the chairman's name, the screen displayed one word: Dad. Victoria froze. She looked at Daniel, then at the phone again. The incoming call screen clearly showed that the number she had just dialed was saved in Daniel's phone as Dad. Daniel immediately noticed her expression and asked what had happened. Victoria slowly turned the screen toward him and asked, "Why is your phone showing Dad when I called our chairman?" Daniel stared at the number. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then his face became unusually serious. He asked Victoria what number she had dialed. She read the number aloud, and Daniel immediately recognized it. It was the number of the man who had raised him. Victoria's confusion grew. She asked whether Daniel knew the chairman personally. Daniel quietly answered that he did. In fact, he knew him better than almost anyone else in the world. "He's my father." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. The young maintenance supervisor she had barely noticed was the chairman's son. But there was something even more surprising. Daniel had never told anyone at the company. Victoria asked why he was working as a maintenance supervisor if his father was the chairman of the entire corporation. Daniel gave a faint smile and explained that he had never wanted his father's money or influence to define his life. His father had offered him a senior position several times, but Daniel had refused. He wanted to prove that he could build a life for himself and raise Lily without depending on the family name. Before Victoria could say anything else, Daniel's phone began ringing. The screen again displayed Dad. Daniel answered. His father's voice sounded weak and hurried. He explained that he had suddenly become ill and was at home with no one around. He asked Daniel to come immediately. Daniel promised he would be there. Victoria listened silently. The chairman's voice was not the voice of a powerful businessman in that moment. It was simply the voice of a father calling his son. Daniel ended the call and immediately picked up his toolbox. Victoria stopped him and said that she would drive him. Daniel refused at first, but Victoria insisted. As they walked toward the elevator, Victoria could not stop thinking about the strange coincidence. She had borrowed a stranger's phone to call the most powerful man in her company. Instead, she had discovered that the stranger was his son, and she had a feeling that this was only the beginning. Victoria drove Daniel to the chairman's private residence herself. During the journey, she asked him why he had never mentioned his connection to the company. Daniel explained that he had spent most of his life trying to escape the shadow of his father's success. His father had built the company from nothing and eventually became one of the most respected businessmen in the country. Daniel loved him deeply, but he had always feared that people would treat him differently if they knew who his father was. After Lily's mother passed away, Daniel's priorities became even simpler. He wanted to give his daughter a stable childhood, and working honestly was more important to him than inheriting a fortune. Victoria listened carefully. For the first time, she realized that the quiet maintenance supervisor she had passed every morning was not an ordinary employee. He was a man who had deliberately chosen a difficult life because he wanted his daughter to grow up, knowing the value of hard work. When they reached the house, they found the chairman sitting in his study, looking exhausted but conscious. His doctor had already arrived and assured them that he was stable, but stress and exhaustion had caused the sudden weakness. Daniel immediately sat beside his father and held his hand. The powerful chairman looked at his son and smiled. He asked who the young woman was. Daniel introduced Victoria as the CEO of Sterling International. His father immediately recognized her and laughed softly. He told Daniel that he had heard about Victoria for years and admired the way she had transformed the company. Then he looked at Victoria and said something that shocked her. "You should know that Daniel is the only person I trust enough to take over everything I built." Victoria looked at Daniel, but Daniel quickly shook his head. He had never wanted that responsibility. The chairman then revealed why he had been trying to reach Daniel that morning. He had received troubling information about a financial conspiracy inside the company. Someone on the executive board was secretly attempting to remove Victoria from her position and manipulate the company's shares. The chairman had discovered the plan, but needed someone he could trust completely to investigate it. He had intended to ask Daniel to help him, but before he could explain everything, his health had suddenly deteriorated. Victoria immediately realized that the strange phone call had brought her directly to the truth she had been searching for. Over the next several days, Victoria and Daniel worked together in secret. Daniel used his knowledge of the building and its employees to uncover information that executives would never have shared with the CEO. Victoria examined financial records while Daniel tracked unusual movements within the company. Their partnership slowly changed the way they saw each other. Victoria discovered that behind Daniel's quiet personality was a remarkably intelligent and patient man. Daniel discovered that Victoria was not the cold, intimidating CEO everyone believed her to be. She was simply a woman, carrying enormous responsibility, and rarely allowing anyone close enough to see how much pressure she felt. Their connection grew naturally. Victoria became close to Lily as well, often bringing her books and helping Daniel choose small gifts for her. Lily quickly noticed the way Victoria and her father looked at each other. One evening, she innocently asked Victoria whether she planned to stay in their lives. Victoria laughed nervously and said she did not know. Lily simply smiled and said, "I think Dad likes you." Victoria could not stop smiling after that. Eventually, Daniel and Victoria uncovered the person behind the conspiracy. It was a senior executive who had been secretly transferring company funds and planning to blame Victoria for the losses. The chairman's evidence exposed everything, and the executive was removed from the company. The crisis that had threatened Victoria's position was finally over. A few weeks later, Victoria stood in the same corporate lobby where she had first borrowed Daniel's phone. Daniel was beside her, holding Lily's hand. Victoria smiled and reminded him that everything had started because she needed to make one phone call. Daniel laughed and said, "And you accidentally called my dad." Victoria looked at Lily, then at Daniel. "No," she replied softly. "I think that phone call introduced me to the people who were meant to become part of my life." Daniel smiled. For years, his phone had simply stored his father's number under one word, Dad. But that accidental call had opened the door to a completely unexpected future. A stronger family, a new love, and a life neither Daniel nor Victoria had ever planned. And sometimes, the most important phone call of your life is the one you never intended to make.